Hello there again. This is Unit 12. We're going to focus on dairy in this section, and chapters 26 and 27 in your textbook and your recommended reading is section. Real quickly, the major dairy breeds are listed. There's 4 of them on this. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. This is a Montebelliard that is used a little bit in the crossbreeding area around Norwegian red, and known not so much for their high milk production, but the quality of feet and legs and fertility is why they're being used in the crossbred area. So I added a little bit on registration numbers for major U.S. breeds of dairy cattle, and you can look at how that's changed from 1970 to 2013 and the years that the association were formed. A little bit of background, as well as average DHI performance by breed. And notice in terms of leading in milk production are the Holsteins, and leading in milk, fat, and components are the Guernsey and the Jersey up there in terms of milk, fat, and milk components, which is what makes some of our products like cheese and such so important, and we get high yielding out of it. A little on dairy type, and that would be what we call conformation. We want dairy animals to be angular, long, lean necks with very, very good udders. And you say, well, why is dairy type important, or why is conformation important? Because it often is highly correlated with high milk production and longevity. But that's not always the case. But statistically speaking, if you get on to farms, cows that are made right tend to last longer and tend to be more productive members of the herd for longer periods of time. So our Dairy Cow Unified Scorecard and Classification System is one of the tools that the dairy business uses in order to select superior animals and give us some data to go by in terms of helping make mating decisions and help. So cows and bulls are rated on a lot of different things here, and I've listed a few of them, and there's a few updates going on to some of that, of course, and then the final classification scores added up, and you see the rating systems down at the bottom. And obviously your goal would be to have all excellent cows, but it's extremely, extremely difficult to do, especially in a very big herd. But the more that you can get towards the upper end. So we take that classification score, and that is used in calculating the predicted transmitting ability for type. Again, a great sales tool and used in the mating and selection on the pedigree side. We talk about milk production and kind of go through history here just a little bit. 1940, we had just under 24 million cows, averaging about 4,600 pounds of milk per cow per year. Fast forward to 2005, about 9 million cows in the U.S. At about just under 20,000 pounds of milk per year. And if you get to about 2017 now in the newest data, and it's probably in the slide set here somewhere, the newest data still has us at about 9 or 9.2 million cows, and we're, I believe, at about 21,000 pounds of milk per cow per year on average in the United States. And that's a lot due to genetics, a lot due to feeding, and a lot due to increases in management. Those are the big. So I believe we've seen this graph before, but thought we'd throw it back into the slide set here so you can revisit it. Changes in milk production. This goes back to 1987 data all the way to 2011. Notice those lines going opposite. Average productive life in dairy cows is a little on the short side for those of us in the industry in terms of preference right now. Only about 3 to 4 years would be the average lifespan of cows. So when we talk about a 3 or 4 year old cow, they've only had 2 or potentially 3 calves. You say, so why such a short life? Because of the milk production stressors that we've got on them now, and a little bit of problems with fertility and things that we're trying to improve and focus on. We would like to improve upon that life production there. But the reasons for culling is the biggest one is reproductive failure. We're just struggling to get cows bred. That is slowly improving, but it's a trait that we're trying to work on. Lower milk yield always as cows drop off and aren't capable to produce, whether it's due to genetics or feeding or health problems or breakdown of the udder. we tend to put them on the coal list. Poor feet and legs can't maybe handle the rigorous stress of concrete and confinement facilities and so forth, and health problems like mastitis. So hopefully we're choosing replacement heifers from families that are superior in a lot of these categories, and again, we're working and collecting more to give us a better handle on how to improve some of these challenges that I've cited. So records are essential, and we have a National Cooperative Dairy Herd Improvement Program, or Dairy Herd Information, as it's now known, that really helps create a national production database. On what that does, there's some options here for DHI that's kind of been the historic benchmark for collection and analysis of data and providing information back to producers. That's evolving a little bit now with a lot more on-farm data collection, whether you have your own meters and own systems there on the farm, or certainly with the robots and automation and computer technology. All of these records, even what you would collect on your own operation, can be pretty easily standardized to a 305-day milk record, so that you can easily compare fairly cows that might have a 300-day lactation versus a cow that might have a 400-day lactation in terms of productivity. There's a lot of information. If you've never looked at an individual cow sheet from DHI, this provides you with a snapshot of what a cow's lactation may look like over time, and certainly a lot of data, but this would be every month she would have been tested, and so you can decipher on here, if you spend a little time looking, where her highest milk production was and where she ended up at, how many days she was dry, a little bit on sire information and so forth. So there's a lot of information on this page, but historically, farms that were on test would get information like this on every cow on their farm, and then kind of whole farm analysis that would help and aid and make decisions on mating, breeding, culling, and management, and so forth. Of course, breeding challenges are extremely high. I cited that as one of the largest aspects of the dairy business that we're trying to improve, and probably the most challenging one. So visual detection of estrus, like we talked about in the reproduction section, is super important. About 90% of the cattle in the dairy business are bred artificially through AI, and if you look at semen price today, it's leveled off where a lot of semen is priced at about that $30 per unit range, and you'll see obviously some higher and a little bit lower. It used to be a lot of the young sires you could buy relatively cheap, as the semen companies were trying to get more of that used and collect data on it, and then the really proven expensive sires were very expensive, and still you can certainly find plenty of those. Now if you're at a really large operation and can purchase several hundred units at a time, you can buy it much cheaper in bulk discounts and so forth. But if you just went on average a good 30 to talk about. 3 reasons natural service is highly unpopular in the dairy business is: number 1, artificial insemination. Though the bulls that are available at the bull studs are so genetically superior and have so much data, you just don't find a lot of extensive use of bulls in the dairy business. The occasional cleanup bull here and there or something like that is certainly out there, but not entire farm bred. Farms bred by natural service is not as common. So we have a lot of superior semen available for us to choose from. And then lastly, it's a safety thing. Dairy operators work so closely with their cattle and would have to come in contact with bulls on such a regular basis that it's a safety issue on the farm. And unfortunately, there's some really sad stories, and even some of them quite local here, where we have some tragedies happen. So I would encourage any of you that if you're in the same pen as bulls on the farm, understand what you can do to be safe, how you can always know your ways out and know where that bull is at all times, and don't ever let them get their head down and headed towards you where you don't have a position to get out, because they're obviously very large animals that can do quite a bit of damage. Heritabilities, things that are low heritability, very difficult to breed for or breed out of them. Ketosis, which is a disease. Mastitis, obviously a disease. Cystic ovarian disease and milk fever, very hard to breed against or breed for or make changes genetically on. Medium heritability, yearly milk production, protein in the milk, fat yield, and so forth. And then high heritability traits would be things like milk fat and milk protein. Stature is very highly heritable and things. So again, some heritability charts. Notice stature is very, very easy to breed for, and been trying to change that in the business. Some abnormalities, and you've seen a few of these maybe prior in prior units. So we'll not spend a lot of time on this. They're very, very rare and often result in death, or those animals, again, don't make it far enough in order to reproduce. But genetic advancement has been so rapid because of such high use of AI. So, for example, our superior sires out there in the industry may have easily more than 100,000 daughters. And so if you take a bull like a Goldwyn or O-Man, that would be a couple common names that would have a longevity in the industry right now, would have easily 100,000 daughters out there in the industry and have a huge genetic impact. So as we collect data on the sires that are coming through now, it tends to be quite accurate, and we have a very, very good idea in terms of what we're going to have offspring. Crossbreeding has been hard to gain a foothold, and I don't want to disparage it like it doesn't have a place in the industry, because it certainly does. And you see producers continue to play with it, and there's a few around here that have been successful. But it's been a struggle to find the ideal cross, because you have anytime you cross, if you start with Holsteins, anytime you cross something with a Holstein, you give up milk production. Anytime you cross something with a Jersey or Guernsey, you tend to sacrifice some milk components. So it's been difficult to find that ideal cross that is genetically superior to either purebred parent throughout the country. And so even some that have played with it for a while continue to work with it to see how we can improve it. Genetic evaluations, again, are based a lot on sire-daughter comparisons with contemporary herd mates, and used to be based upon a lot on progeny testing. We wait until we got daughters out there in the industry and to see how they would perform, and still a lot of that going on. But there's a huge migration to now genomic testing, where we get bulls on the ground out of what we think would be superior matings and genetics, and we can actually pull hair, take hair clippings and send them to the laboratory and get a genetic profile on that animal and decide if that bull needs to be raised to go to stud and make semen, or whether we're going to pass on that one and look for the next one. So we're actually making bulls out of we have bull mothers that aren't even milking yet anymore, because we can harvest eggs and create another flush and create another calving before that cow even gets into the system in terms of milking. So genetic generational interval is being shortened very, very quickly in the dairy industry at this time. Sire selection, I say best unlinear, unbiased prediction of the BLUP method has been pretty common, used to do some calculations. So we can calculate predicted transmitting abilities, and for you beef guys out there, that would be our analogy to EPDs. For a bunch of different things, I've listed just a few here, or you can come down and get kind of combine a lot of those things into one simple number called net merit, giving an economic value compared to our herd mates. You can also use type production index, again another helpful tool in predicting offspring, and very good. A little on farm demographics, and this stuff comes out of your textbook, that the average farm size is about 100 milking cows with 30 dry cows and 100 heifers. I think the more in-tune data in the industry would say that average is a lot closer to 200 milking cows. In terms of the acreage size, it's probably not that much different than that. Again, the majority of the milk is still marketed through a cooperative like Prairie Farms or DFA, selling a little over 2 million pounds of milk annually. But that farm size number continues to rise as economics of scale number higher. Lactating cow nutrition, again, the average lactation, or the goal for our lactation, is 305 days with a production that's about 21,000 pounds of milk is kind of what demographically is average in the industry. We have lots of herds now popping over 25,000 pounds average milk per cow per year. Top producing cows, well above 40,000 pounds of milk per year, per cow per year. And so if you divide that over 305 days or so, notice that you got cows that are, averaging in 100 pounds a day for 300 days or more than 100 pounds a day. So fantastic production. We actually have a couple farms. The top producing one in Illinois is in the mid 30s in terms of rolling herd average is what that's called. Top producing herds, or many herds average. They're in 36, approaching 40,000 pounds of milk per cow per year as an average on about 250 cows. So we got cows that will average 150 pounds a day, some of them close to 200 pounds a day, making lots of milk fat and lots of milk protein. World record lactation. You say, wow, what would a world record cow look like? So Evergreen View My Gold is her number or her name. She's from Waldo, Wisconsin, and this was set last year. Actually, the record, I believe, was broken twice in the last calendar year, basically. So over 365 days, she made 77,480 pounds of milk. So you say, well, that's a lot. She averaged close to 200 pounds a day over that year's time. That's phenomenal. And just to give you a frame of reference, a typical semi-milk tanker carries about 45,000 pounds of milk. So she nearly filled 2 tankers by herself in the last calendar year. That's just phenomenal. Milk production capability that we have out there. So that tells you what a great need for energy and total pounds of feed that we've got to get through a cow. A cow that's just milking 40 pounds of milk, is going to need 1.25 times more energy for lactation than maintenance. Take that at 80 or 100 or 120 or 150 pounds. The nutritional support and the excellence of your facility and the excellence of your management has to be on point all the time for that to happen. Lactation curves, and you'll see a diagram of that in a second. Like all mammals, they start and then they peak within about 4 to 6 weeks, and then kind of a slow tail off. So early stages of lactation, and here I'm talking from the time of calving till about 45 to 60 days in milk. Dry matter intake is what DMI stands for, and energy is going to lag behind milk production. So basically they're going to lose body weight, and we call that the negative energy balance area, where they struggle to eat enough feed to support the amount of milk that she wants to make. And so the only other way to keep up with that is to pull some body weight off her back and put that in the milk pail. And good cows will do that, and as long as we can support them well enough, it does not make them sick. If your ration's not up to par, you can have some sick cows in that time frame. Mid-lactation here, now we're talking about day like 60 to 90 all the way up to day 150 or so. Dry matter intake has finally caught up to the amount of milk production that she is making, and so she's beginning now to put on a little bit of body weight. Fertility rates rise, and reproductive performance is much better once we reach that mid-lactation time frame, and hopefully by now we're breeding successfully and getting cows pregnant so we can keep our calving. I said you'd see a chart on here, so we'll explain this kind of quickly. The blue line is milk production. The gray dashed line is body weight or body condition score, and the orange dashed line is feed intake. So you see, we see milk production start, and there's no numbers on the y-axis of the scale, and that's okay. You can think about it at 40 or 80 or whatever it might be, cows as they calve in on month 0. And by 2 months in, they've hit about their peak milk up there, and then they tail off slowly all the way out to the 10th month or something like that. And I mentioned the negative energy balance zone. Is notice that orange line doesn't hit peak till well after the peak milk production. That area in there in which the orange line is under the blue line, that's when they're losing body weight. And so you can see kind of that dip in body condition through there, and very important that we understand how to support milk yield and cow health as best we can. Late lactation cows, and I'm talking about cows about 200 days in milk plus. Dry matter intake is very adequate here usually for daily milk production, and they're probably gaining weight, and those cows should be pregnant. The one thing that you need to guard against here is that we do not get cows too fat before they go into the dry period. That causes all kinds of health problems that we want to avoid. So support nutritionally as best you can as high in milk production as is economically possible, and hopefully again pregnant cows are ready to go dry and milking as much as you can get them to their late lactation pretty economically. I've talked about body condition scoring before, and the dairy guys use a 1 to 5 body condition scale. It's very similar to beef, but again, I can't underscore the importance of good body condition scoring and how effective it can be for your operation to gauge cow health. And so I would think about, if I were a producer, body condition scoring at calving. I would body condition score whenever they hit peak milk, or maybe the first time I inseminate. I would body condition score whenever I have them confirmed pregnant, and I would body condition score them again at dry off time. And if you body score on a regular basis and keep track of that number, you can really have a good handle on what your cows are doing throughout lactation and how to improve or make changes to your nutritional program and what challenges you may have. Great tool. It doesn't cost you anything. Lactating cows and some elements of successful dairy nutrition programs. Number one, a lot of high quality clean water available. You cannot make milk without lots of fresh clean water available. So clean those water tanks often. Make sure there's plenty of water access per animal on the farm. High quality feedstuffs, and you would assume that is a given. But folks, if you want to win the battle on dairy farms, make great quality forages. Make great corn silage, great alfalfa hay or alfalfa haylage or great baleage. Make great quality feeds. That allows you to save money everywhere else on your farm, and it will keep your cows healthy in the long run. So that'll allow you to use that optimal level of grain supplementation. Whenever we have crappy forages, all you will have to do as a manager is try and hide those with a lot more grain and a lot more expense. So make great quality feeds. I can't underscore that one enough. Monitor cud chewing. That tells you how happy and comfortable and how healthy the rumens are of the cows. So take a look at that. Cows will tell you if they're uncomfortable or unhappy or their stomachs don't feel well. Have sufficient bunk space. You need about 2 feet of bunk space per animal in the barn for them to be able to all comfortably eat. So make sure that that is available for you, and consistent high dry matter intakes. Again, cattle love consistency, and so having feed available basically 24 hours a day without wasting that much would be a great idea. And then make sure that you're monitoring or tracking dry matter intakes and that they're as high as you can get them. Especially after milking time, you should have feed available as those cows come back from the parlor. That's when they're probably going to eat some of the biggest bulks of their meals per day. So making sure that you have feed available at that point in time, and then regularly pushing up feed will kind of stimulate cows to get up out of the stall and come up and eat a little bit more. No free choice ration components, and by free choice I mean they can go pick whatever they want to eat. Today's dairy industry has gone a lot to TMR, or total mixed rations, and everything mixed in one presentation. The only way that can vary is occasionally you have need to maybe feed a little bit of extra free choice hay to a certain group of animals or something like that. But in general, we would prefer not to allow cows to select what they eat. Obviously, if your cows are on pasture, they're going to select a lot of what they eat. Different from the old buffet style, so to speak, where they could pick corn silage if they wanted, they could eat mineral if they wanted, they could eat grain if they wanted, and so on and so forth. Concentrate on cow comfort, and by that I mean proper cooling in the stall area in the barn, proper cooling in the holding pen, appropriately sized stalls with a proper amount of bedding in them. Cow comfort will take you a long way. Comfortable cows are happy cows, and you should see cows laying down about half of the time. That's when the money is made, as they lay down and make milk. Minimize variation in feedstuffs. Don't change your feeding program any more than you have to. Again, the consistency of that is critical. And then manage and minimize whatever health problems can prevent. So the ideal day in the life of a cow, like I said, they should be lying down half of the time. If you look out there and you see the bulk of your string of cows in the pen lying down after they've had a good meal and a good drink, not a lot of standing cows milling around. You can hear the bank cha-ching, cha-ching out there. That's when they're making money for you. About 20% of the time of their day should be eating, 13% of their time in the milking process, 4% drinking, and then 6% of their time each in just some social interaction. Cows are very social animals, and 6% of the time in lockups. You don't want cows being locked up in the headlocks any more than you have to. I talked about ration bases, and those should be high quality forages. Get back to that just too much with the TMR is the most effective way to do that at this point in time, closely reflecting the stage of lactation, and the number of rations on the farm might vary depending on farm size and capability to deliver additional feeding components or different additional ration groups. So if we did a 500 cow dairy, we might need a startup ration. That would be cows that are just fresh. We might need a high group ration, which would be your highest producing cows on the farm. A low group ration, which would maybe be your low producing cows on the farm. A far off dry cow, that would be your cows that are dry 60 and down to 30 days prior to calving. And then maybe a close-up ration, which would be cows that are going to calve within the next 30 days. So you might have 5 or 6 rations on the farm to mix. Obviously, the more that you have, the more work it is, the more labor intensive it gets. But oftentimes you can specially tailor each one of those diets to each stage of lactation or stage of production for those particular cows, and you can take the opportunity to save money in certain areas and spend money in other areas that get you the most optimal return on your investment. Always test your forages regularly. Work with a very, very good and reputable nutritionist who will help you assist with ration formulation and test those feedstuffs, those forages that you make out there, and then will closely match what you have for forage to the feeding program. Feed costs is easily 50% of the farm expense, if not more. So you have to concentrate on heat stressors. I mentioned they're stressed at 70 degrees and they're really stressing by 77 degrees. So we should be having heat abatement prior to the time that they reach 77 degrees Fahrenheit. We can lose 8 to 10 pounds of milk per cow per day. Think about those hot summer days in which in southern Illinois anyway, sometimes we can reach 100 degrees plus heat index, and with high humidity, those are bad. But really the worst times are whenever we have evenings, whenever it's 80 or 85 and it doesn't cool off at night. Cow's body temperature is actually the highest at night time. And so if they can't cool off at night, that's when we really see heat stress, and we can see 10 to 15 pounds per cow loss per day easily. And the only way cows can cool themselves is through panting. They do not sweat. So whenever they pant excessively, I say, what else do they lose? They lose a lot of saliva. You'll see saliva pools whenever cows pant. Well, when they lose saliva, they lose not only moisture, but they also lose a lot of bicarbonate salts that help buffer the rumen. So that's very, very critical that we keep cows cool through proper ventilation in your barn. So good barn design, lots of fans, and sprinklers where appropriate. They'll also decrease the amount of feed that they eat because lots of feed eating, remember we have fermentation going on there, and byproduct of that is heat. So sometimes you'll see them drop in terms of feed intake by as much as 15% or so, and we'll have trouble getting cows pregnant during that time, and maybe drops as much as 20%. And I know, and I've visited with producers locally who have a pretty good eye to the weather and lots of history to back it up, and they'll pretty well just determine that it's not worth breeding cows in that kind of heat. pregnancies is quite low. Some scientific data suggests that if you breed a cow in heat, that's during a really hot period, that sometimes you have decreased conception rates, but also that next heat period, those eggs that are being made during that heat period, so maybe the next heat cycle, some of those eggs also lack fertility. So we're looking at maybe a 45-day window sometimes of problems getting cows pregnant. Again, feeding management, talk about nutrition of dry cows. The dry off process, it's just healthy just to simply stop milking them. If you remember back to the lactation section, I said just whenever you stop removing milk, cows will stop making milk. And that's the best way, the best scientifically proven way, not any alternating or sometimes we remove milk type of thing for a week. Just stop removing milk and they'll stop making it. Treat those cows for mastitis, so some antibiotic therapy is appropriate at that time. That way you can knock out any bugs that might be hanging out in the mammary gland. And they should be dry for 45 to 60 days. And lots of research going on in this area, but proper mammary involution goes on in that time. A little nutrient density stuff here for rations for dry cows gives you some guidelines, some talking points maybe at home. Your nutritionist. Dry cows should be separate from the milking herd. There's obviously some nutritional differences. They're not milking, so especially if you treat them with antibiotic therapy, you don't want to run the risk of maybe putting a milker on and contaminating your bulk tank with antibiotic milk. And there's some different cow comfort options there. Close-up dry cows, those the last 2 to 3 weeks prior to calving, if you can have a separate pen for those, that would be ideal, because we would maybe like to feed those girls just a little bit differently and have a little bit more space for them to be. Those large, heavy pregnant cows oftentimes need a little bit more room to stretch out. Replacement heifers, most of them can do really, really well on a lot of high forage, and about 2 to 3 pounds of grain will develop well. There's lots of charts and graphs and recommendations out there on what heifers should weigh and how tall they should be based upon their age. And I would encourage you to really have an idea what your heifers should look like at each stage of development. We really need to get Jersey heifers to breeding weight of 650 pounds by about 12 or 13 months of age. And the large breeds, the Holsteins and Swiss and so forth, puberty weight is about 800 pounds. Weight is more critical than age. So that's very, very, very critical. Heavier heifers, and I'm talking heavier heifers at puberty, generally will milk more in their first lactation. Now, don't confuse that with fat. You don't want to get your heifers too thick, too fat, because you'll have lots of other problems and actually will have decreased milk production. We also don't want to get heifers that don't calve until they're 30 or 35 months of age. You're wasting a lot of time and they're eating a lot of feed and you're wasting a lot of money. So here's some recommended breeding weights for each breed. I would encourage you to make note of that. Pretty critical to have this. Calving operations, always as clean and sanitary as you can make it. Well bedded with nice clean straw. I've seen people use sawdust, nice and clean dry sawdust. I've seen people use shredded paper. Anything will work as long as it's clean and as sanitary as you can get it. Assist a cow if she's not calved after 4 to 6 hours of labor. We'll talk about that a little bit more in class. Some of us, and I'm just as guilty as many of you, the minute that you see feet come out of the back end of a cow, you want to go start helping pull a calf, and that's not always necessary. So we'll talk about that in class a little bit, have a good discussion on that. Once that calf is born, dip that navel in iodine and get colostrum, as much colostrum into that calf as soon as you can, and hopefully within the first 3 hours, because we need to transfer those antibodies. Don't permit nursing. Remove those calves ASAP. It's a health thing. It's a safety for the calf issue, and we also want to start controlling how much feed. The first 4 to 8 weeks of life for those baby calves, we can feed whole milk and milk replacer and pasteurized milk. There's a variety of different operations. I tend to prefer the whole milk option or the milk replacer option. I just think you have some more consistency in that formulated dry milk option. Yes, you have to go purchase it, so you have some cost associated there. But I think the consistency of that product, as long as you mix it appropriately, provides you with consistency of feeding. Now, with the advent of on-farm pasteurizers, you can take waste milk, which would be high antibiotic milk that you're throwing away anyway, run it through your pasteurizer, fortify it with some kind of milk replacer fortifier, and then feed that and save some cost that way. I would generally choose not to pull milk out of the tank that you could sell and feed to your babies. I think you would be much better off to go ahead and ship that milk to the sell it off the farm like you normally would any other bottle of milk, and choose to buy a milk replacer. I think you'll save feed in the long run. Always provide water, and you think, well, why would that even be a question? I can tell you there are parts of the country that I've been in and been on farms that the calves have no water available. That's going to impede growth right away. Provide dry feed. They'll start nibbling on dry feed within the first couple days. They may not eat very much, but the sooner that they start eating dry feed, the quicker that rumen will develop and the faster that they will grow. Early on, really, especially the first say 6 weeks or so, we'd probably like them separated in individual huts or individual pens of some kind. We don't want nose-to-nose contact so that we don't transfer diseases. I have here wean as soon as the calves are eating 3 pounds a day for 3 days. Now that has been modified all the way down to 1.5 pounds of feed per day for 3 days. And so we don't wean necessarily on age anymore. So if you get a calf that's 5 weeks old that's eating 2 pounds of feed a day, I'd wean her. You're gonna save some money, and that calf is actually gonna grow faster as you get her, and more economically as you get her weaned. Milking and housing facilities. The most common, of course, facility out there in the industry is free stalls. Easiest in terms of labor usage. But we also have tie or stanchion stalls, loose housing, bedded pack, pasture. You guys can answer the questions in terms of what's more efficient and what's more comfortable, and so forth. We of course need a milking center or parlor and some kind of manure removal schedule. We've got to keep that area nice and cleanly bedded, and unless we're using a compost bedded pack barn in which we're trying to save that organic matter in there, in which you'll go and till your pack a couple times a day, but otherwise you need to plan on removing manure 2 to 3. Here's an overhead picture of a freestall facility. The one thing I want you to notice, you have a lot of cows lying down and you have a few cows eating. Hard to tell what time of day that this picture is taken. Probably milking time on the left side of the screen, and this is probably just after milking time on the right, because you have quite a few cows standing up, but several of them have already eaten and headed back to the stall to lie down. There's a lot of regulations, local, state, and federal, in terms of waste management, and lots of you now have enough animal units. You have to have a certified livestock manager on site. There's a study coming out of South Carolina recently that 75% of the dairies overfed phosphorus, and so the latest Nutrient Research Council guidelines recommended a lower phosphorus feeding rate. And so there's a lot of things in terms of a nutrient management plan that are critical. We have a whole class dedicated to waste management that I hope some of you will choose to take. There's some pyramid information, and bottom line is you should be matching your soil test results and your manure test results up and applying only what the field needs. That's ideal world in terms of and good environmental stewardship. And as part of your waste management plan, your dead stock disposal should be in there. Milking parlor design, you should have a concrete platform if you're going with a traditional parlor, about 30 inches raised platform, something comfortable for those that will be milking in the parlor, an appropriately wide pit. You don't want it too wide because that increases steps, but you don't want it so narrow that you're running into each other. Proper milking procedure, but bottom line is you want to get the units attached onto the animal within a minute's time. You need to have pre-dip time to kill any pathogen that's there, but you also want to take advantage of oxytocin milk letdown and have that unit attached at about 1 minute. After removal of the unit or automatic takeoffs, we should have some post-dip in iodine solution or something in there to keep those teats nice and clean, and then help them seal them up. And make sure that your equipment is sanitary. Make high quality milk, prevent disease problems, and stay on a regular milking schedule, whether you're milking two times, 3 times, 4 times a day, or some combination. I have some pictures in here of different parlor designs, so you can, if you've not been in one, you can kind of see what they look like. This is a herringbone design parlor. Obviously, we have about a double 12 here, something like that. Notice the unit is attached from the side. We have an arm that hangs in there that helps kind of support the unit so it sits nice and level. All the cows enter from the back and exit through the front. This would be what we call a parallel parlor, where the cows all enter in the back and they make a 90-degree turn, and so you would be attaching the unit from between the back legs. As you see here, this looks to be like about a double 24 parallel parlor, and these cows are released. There's a gate that lifts in front of them, and they will walk out straight forward and exit the parlor. These parlors are generally not as long, but they're a little wider than a herringbone parlor. It really comes to preference. Parallel parlors used to be very rare, and now they're very, very common. This is what we call a carousel or rotary parlor. So the cows will enter. If you see kind of towards the top of the screen and the back of the parlor there, cows will enter one at a time onto the platform, and the entire platform rotates, and the milking process will occur in one rotation of the platform, and by the time they get to the exit lane, which is pretty well right next to the entrance lane, they'll back off of the platform and away they go. And this is probably one of the most efficient ways to milk cows, quickest ways to get cows milked the entire herd, because you never have to worry about loading and unloading. You don't have empty stalls on your platform. Obviously, you can't talk about today's milking systems without looking and discussing the robot milker, and here's a Lely Astronaut parlor. So there's a couple different methods of robotic milking. You can have the completely voluntary system where cows enter at their own will and come in whenever they so choose. There's a little bit of feed in there for them to be enticed to come in, but the robot then takes care of attaching all the units, does all the sanitation, both pre and post dip. Almost always there's a sample pulled and a conductivity test ran to detect for mastitis or something wrong with the cow, and it's all tracked very, very much electronically, so you have a absolute blueprint every time that cow enters the stall, how much she milked, how much she ate, what her milk looked like from a health perspective, and so forth. Great tools that are coming along, and they continue to evolve all the time. And that's an example of a Lely Astronaut stall. Here's a De La Val arm, a little bit different, and another one. It's not necessarily Lely or De La Val specific, but you can also have a little bit more where it's a set schedule. Cows are allowed to enter the parlor either and be milked either 2 or 3 times a day, and maybe there's a one-way gate system in which they can only move like in a circular fashion in the barn, and so that might be another example of how animals are managed. But this is dramatically increasing the amount of data that we can collect on our individual cows. It's obviously decreasing the amount of time that producers have to spend in the parlor providing their own labor or hiring labor to milk cows. Clearly robots are very, very expensive, but one of the side benefits that some didn't anticipate is because now we don't have to spend 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 hours a day in the parlor, we have more time dedicated to other things on the farm, whether it's maintenance or making great quality feed, things of that nature that are now also improving. So very, very interesting. If you've not been to a robot farm, they're really, really fascinating to watch. Diseases on the farm, there's a lot of similarities between dairy and beef cattle, but because of milk and how fast it moves, there's a lot of very stringent specifications. We have things like brucellosis, that's a sexually transmitted disease that reduces fertility, that we don't see. We've pretty well managed our way around that for the most part. Mastitis continues to be the #1 disease on all dairy farms, which is inflammation of the mammary gland. Costs between $200 and $300 per cow per year, and that's almost no matter how good you are at preventing it. So it can be very hard to detect early, and cows will give you an indication because their somatic cell count will begin to rise, and that can be checked through milk cultures. But clinical symptoms are usually white chunks in the milk, or watery or bloody milk, and then you've got to get them on some antibiotic therapy. Sometimes the udder is swollen or red or hard. The cow actually can become febrile or sick, provide a body temperature for you. And there's basically 2 types of mastitis. One type can be passed from cow to cow, but that organism has to live in milk. That one is really tough to get rid of on your farm. The other one is environmental, where the organisms are picked up in the environment, like the stalls or on your hands or something like that, caused by unsanitary conditions. That one usually readily responds to treatment, and you can get rid of it completely on your farm until the next time. So oftentimes those outbreaks of environmental disease, mastitis, are completely separate cases and not always very closely related. High cull rates on those mastitis cases. There's a lot of things that are connected to that in terms of problems. It usually takes them longer to show heat. It usually takes more services per conception. They're open for more days. We spend a lot of money on treatments and a lot of time, and of course we have to throw away the milk for a while, and we'll tend to lose total milk production. So it's very, very expensive disease. Here's a little bit in terms of mastitis preventative management and some things that may go along with helping somatic cell rates. Some bulk tank somatic cell counts by herd size, and it gives you an idea on where we should sit. In the United States, our legal limit for shipping milk is 750,000. In Europe, it's 400,000, so their milk quality requirements are actually lower than ours. There's been lots of discussion about that in the States. Threw in another picture of a milking machine, and I just threw this in here just to show you that cleanliness is key here. Notice the cow is basically clean. There's not manure and dirt and mud up on her udder. There's not mud up on her flank or on her belly. That assists in keeping not only pathogens away, but high quality milk as that goes. And the unit is hanging there nice and pretty well level, so the teat cups are attached appropriately, so we don't have issues with that. You can walk into many barns and you find a lot of dirty cows, and that's generally indicates a lot of problems. Costs and returns, and I mentioned here that large farms aren't necessarily more profitable than smaller farms. Economics of scale don't always work out. Clearly there's some advantages to being larger and being able to buy things in larger quantities, but large farms can be just as poorly managed as small farms, and small farms can be just as profitable as a large operation. There's some performance benchmarks that are listed here that we can discuss in more detail later on, but those are pretty good numbers to stretch across the entire industry, whether you have robots or not, whether you're large or not, and whatever size that you are. Those are very, very good numbers to all the farms. So as we wrap it up here, some take-home messages. I mentioned reproductive success is a huge focal point for today's industry, and it's one of the main challenges that we have. And we continue to work on that. And those of you who are dairy guys and gals here listening in, make that one of your priorities and get better at it. Number 2, focus on nutrition and cow comfort and management. That will help increase your returns as well. Understand there are opportunities to save costs along the line. But as well as you want to find those opportunities to save costs, look for places that you can invest dollars as well. You can't always be saving money and cutting corners. At times you've got to invest money in order to get a greater return. There's lots of options for milking systems. I don't have a favorite. Select the one that best fits you. There's ones obviously I would pick if I were doing it for one reason or another, and some just because I thought they were neat looking. But select the operation that fits select the milking system that fits you the best. And then key in on milk quality and maintaining high herd health. High milk quality will bring you higher returns on your milk. Maintaining herd health will bring in lower inputs in terms of eliminating or decreasing the amount of money that you have to spend on lost milk and treatment protocols and the veterinarian visiting the farm. So a few things that I hope will be take-home messages. I'll look forward to chatting with you in class about dairy.